Hello. From June 13th to June 15th, the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce will be hosting the 16th edition of the Brazil-Canada Conference at PDAC, taking place in person in Toronto. We're also hosting the second Brazil-Canada Virtual Mining Conference at PDAC that started on March 7th and will continue until May 31st. I'm Carolina Alberna, CEO of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here today with Greg McNab, partner at Baker McKenzie, and Joaquim Muniz, partner at Rossi Watanabe, to talk about energy transition and strategic minerals for clean energy transition. So Greg, Joaquim, welcome, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
So why don't we start? I'll start with you, Greg. Why don't we start by introducing yourself and introduce a little bit of Baker McKenzie?
Sure. So I'm a partner in the Toronto office with Baker McKenzie. I run our Canadian mining group, and I'm part of our global mining group steering committee. Part of the work that Baker McKenzie does with mining clients around the world is put together kind of integrated advice on things like energy transition and foreign investment rules, that kind of thing. So I'm lucky enough to get to work with Joaquim on a regular basis and have for years. But this is a typical situation for us to deal with global issues for clients so that we can give them kind of integrated advice. And those are some of the things that we're going to talk about today.
And how's energy transition evolving in the mining sector?
So before we drill down onto exactly how the energy transition issue is changing within the mining sector, it really is important to recognize that we're now officially in a transition period. So I say that because we've now come to terms with the fact that there is a transition, and it's not an overnight exercise. So we're not changing our energy grid overnight. That's been a challenge for those of us working in this industry for about 10 years now. So now we have to layer on the climate change analysis of how that transition should unfold, where, how fast, when, what technology, et cetera. But that's where we're getting to now. So to answer your question, there's two perspectives from which to think about the energy transition in the mining sector. So the first one is the perspective of what minerals are being produced to support the energy transition. And that means both the products being mined, which have changed, as we will talk about today and shortly. And that's the focus on the what question, so what's being mined. In some cases, this means that the mining sector now focuses on mining and processing in jurisdictions where we previously we weren't focused. So related to that question of new jurisdictions is the even newer question of security of supply, which has become even more relevant due to recent events. So, and then second, how the production of energy is used to power mining. That involves considerations like standalone power production with no grid dependence, battery operated mine equipment to reduce infrastructure, fuel source choices and availability. So there's two kind of sides to that question. So both of which have now become important considerations for our mining clients. So demand for critical minerals and metals, which are vital in the manufacture of clean energy technologies, is higher than ever. We all see that in the electrification of our grid and most industries all around us, and that's expected to continue. So most governments now around the world are working to secure supply of these minerals and metals that go into this energy transition. So this often means not only significant investment in domestic production, but also state support focused on enabling supply of critical minerals from third-party nations, and sometimes involving, government actors like export credit agencies. So metals and non-metals that are considered vital for the economic well-being of the world's major economies, including the mining sector, have to consider a new range of kind of risks and considerations. And so finally, I would just say strategic and critical are two words that we kind of throw around equally, but they do have different meanings. So strategic is usually associated more with commodities associated or essential for national defense, while critical encompasses commodities essential to both the national defense and non-defense or commercial issues. So that's a longer answer to your question.
No, thank you. It's a lot of very insightful information, so I appreciate it. So we talked about the critical minerals, but what's the role of those critical minerals in energy transition?
So the role, and it's changed somewhat. So for those of us in the industry, we've always told ourselves that, mining powers the economy, and mining's at the background or the backbone of, just about everything we do and touch. But that's become even more evident when you now look at how the mining industry, how it evolves and how it works. So everything from production, how mines function, transportation, data processing, all of those things that go into operating an efficient and economical and profitable mine. Those are the kinds of things that critical minerals are used for. So we're into discussion of things, we call it clean energy. So clean energy technologies versus energy systems fueled by traditional hydrocarbon resources. And those are the clean energy side of things usually involves solar panels and plants, wind farms, electric vehicles and equipment. Those kinds of things require more metals and minerals to build and to operate. So that's kind of when you ask about where the critical minerals fit in, it's usually in the infrastructure to build and operate a mine, and then get the product from the mine out to where it's eventually needed in the most efficient way possible.
And what metals are we talking about? What are those metals and minerals that are critical in that context?
And so that's a good question that goes kind of to the heart of this whole discussion and the question. And it varies slightly depending on which country you're dealing with. So one of the first countries to have a focused, well-established critical mineral strategy was Australia. The US has one. Brazil is obviously talking about it, as is Canada, even specifically here in the province of Ontario, where we are. But each government's definition of critical varies slightly. So depending on which country you're in, the list that I'm going to talk about now varies slightly, but in most countries, it involves lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, graphite, which are all critical to ensure basically battery performance, longevity, energy density. And then on the rare earth side, so we're usually talking about things like dysprosium, terbium. Those are essential for the operation of magnets, which are a big part of wind turbines and motors. So
copper as well?
Copper, and copper is the kind of the backbone of all our infrastructure networks. So that's probably the one that copper has always been part of the energy infrastructure mix for mining, but it's now even more important. So, and then finally, of course, depending on how far how kind of exotic you want to go on the energy discussion, hydrogen is another resource.
New gold,
Yeah, that's right. So
discussions of hydrogen, both in Canada and Brazil right now, right? All over the world, but specifically Canada and Brazil,
Yeah, and the advantage that Brazil has there, as we've talked about in previous PDACs, Brazil has a huge potential, proportion of its energy being generated from hydro resources. So the opportunities for green hydrogen are significant for Brazil, and so it's an opportunity for them.
Thanks, Greg. So Joaquim, I'll pass it over to you. Can you, before we go into the questions, just briefly introduce yourself and also Trench Rossi Watanabe?
Thank you, Carolina. I'm Joaquim Muniz. I'm partner of Trench Rossi Watanabe in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. Trench Rossi Watanabe is one of the largest firms in Brazil. We have more than 400 lawyers, more than 20 different practice groups, and we've been in association with Baker McKenzie for more than 60 years. We're one of the oldest and most traditional law firms in Brazil. I work both in disputes and in projects, especially what we call EMI, and we could be calling that EMI for 50 years, and you were the right name because it's energy mining infrastructure. So it's on our DNA that energy mining and infrastructure should be treated together. And that's the trend that we see for clients in Brazil. More and more, the energy projects are going for renewables, so solar, even hydrogen, a lot of wind farms, small hydro plants, shifting from the idea that have like those huge power plants like Belo Monte and Madeira that were very controversial to smaller plants. And for all that to work, we need the minerals that Greg mentioned. And you need to bring the infrastructure to the places where the mining is done in a continental country like Brazil.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You do mining, you cannot do anything without it, right? Like it's not gonna go anywhere. So we're talking with Greg a little bit about those critical minerals that are allowing energy transition. So can you share a little bit of where are those critical minerals located?
No, it's interesting because you have a mix of traditional mining countries like Canada, Brazil, Australia, but also new players. And nowadays, most of those minerals are concentrated in few producers. So one of the things that some investors are considering is whether or not we should proceed this way, because we are shifting the dependency on the big oil producers to dependence on a couple of critical mineral producers. And that's why you would see more and more interest in diversifying, trying to find those minerals elsewhere. So that's why I think PDAC this year is going to be quite hot, because people want, like the investors want to find new frontiers for those minerals. But going specifically to the minerals, the most popular one right now is lithium. You have this what we call the lithium triangle in South America with Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. That the world's largest lithium reserves, and it's quite that's a huge land of opportunity. If you refer to niobium, Brazil is the largest producer. You have local Lombite, where you can find niobium. In addition to Brazil, you can find in Canada, Australia, and Nigeria. Then you have manganese. China owns more than 66% of the global output. And then you have Russia. So you see, like, again, the concentration in some countries, and there are some political issues there. Brazil is also a large producer, so we see a lot of potential for manganese in Brazil. China is also produces the vast majority of molybdenum.
Rare earth minerals, right? They're very strong on
yes,
that.
rare minerals. Like for manganese, we have South Africa with 1/3 of the output in Brazil. For tantalum, the Democratic Republic of Congo is the world's largest producers. And then you get to nickel, that has always been popular, but the highest peak of popularity right now. Then it's more diversified. I have Indonesia, Australia, Brazil, Russia, the Philippines. But it's still, like, if we go from each one of them, the production is still concentrated in a couple or 3 or maximum 4 countries. So there are a lot of room to try to find new suppliers, since like the demand will be huge in the coming years.
Yeah, that's not enough minerals being mined right now for the demand that they're expecting, right? So there's definitely, I mean, again, this is kind of obvious, the results of the price increase and all of that we already been seeing for a couple of years. But so you mentioned about the concentration of the players. Who owns those minerals right now? I mean, you mentioned a few countries, and then the concentration of the players. Are those minerals in the hands of a few companies, or do you see like a vast majority of players in that space?
Not much. I think it pretty much reflects the concentration of countries that produce those minerals also reflect that the players are also not many players for each country. Like if you get, for instance, nickel is the one with most players because the traditional mineral. You have Vale, you have Nordisk, you have some Chinese companies, have BHP, Glencore. As to nickel, you have more variety. For cobalt, you have Glencore as the world's largest company. You have also China Molybdenum, Vale. But if you get to other very specific, for instance, I can mention a Brazilian company with which we work, CBMM. That's the world's top niobium producer, has a large share because traditionally it was not, it was an important mineral, but the demand was not that big. And nowadays they're very well placed since given this rise in the demand. If you get to lithium, you have some Chinese companies, Ibermal, Sociedade Química Mineira de Chile, and Pilbara as the 5 largest lithium producers. If you consider market cap, but there's still for lithium, there's still a lot of room for additional players.
Got it. And who, just to finish, and who is expressing interest in developing projects in this mineral?
I think everyone.
Everyone?
Everyone. But
the new gold rush, right? Like it's the critical minerals rush now.
Everyone. Yeah. And every country has a strategic plan. Yeah. I can mention in Brazil, the government has a plan, a policy for strategic minerals, because we have lithium, we have niobium, have nickel, and we want to spread the efforts. For instance, you have a bill of law to allow mining in First Nations land. Other countries are trying to also to increase, like you see, even a good example is India. If you take into account like the BRIC countries, not to mention China, that has been doing that with the Belt and Road Initiative for a long time, trying to bring infrastructure and get commodities, including mineral commodities. But for instance, India is becoming more aggressive in acquiring mining in other parts of the world, including Latin America. And you see, I see a window of opportunity in Brazil, because in addition to a government that is trying to get approval for new projects, you can always see the change in regulation that allow, for instance, new railroads without public auctions. That's very important if we consider that most of the mineral resources are in places very distant from the port. So mostly you have to bring that to the port through railroads, and it's much easier right now. The government expects more than $20 billion of investment in the next 5 years just in railroads to bring, especially commodity produced places that are distant from the port to the external market. It's also becoming, you see, strategy in allowing new ports and even privatizing the current ports. So despite the political instability, we see a lot of opportunities in Brazil in coming years. I think this shift, especially because Brazil has always been a place where most of our energy comes from renewable sources. And when we finished doing all the large hydro plants, we immediately shifted to give incentives for solar and wind farm, like the increase of wind farms as a market share in the Brazilian electric power grid. It's amazing. And now we also see the same trend for solar. And to accomplish that, we need the new minerals.
Yeah, 100%. No, this is very, and even like to add right now, if you mentioned about the new a policy in Brazil for strategic minerals, Canada just announced as well in the budget 2022, right, over $2 billion in investments for their strategic minerals and for the development of mining, the development of the mining sector to support the energy transition. So I think that this is something that there's no way back, that there's no going back, right? This is a path that we're moving, and I think it's just gonna keep moving forward and in terms of the transition.
Yeah, we see like there's a political push there. Yeah. Like we see the fertilizer market in Brazil, like imported most of our potash, and now we have a war in Europe, and we need to find potash. So we need to explore our potential.
100%. Well, thank you so much. It's been very, very interesting, very insightful. I really appreciate you both taking some time to have this chat with me. Thank you for the support. Baker McKenzie is a platinum sponsor of the 16th edition of the Brazil Canada at PDAC series of events, and we'll be hosting, in partnership with Baker McKenzie, our Brazil Canada Capital Markets and Mining Financing Breakfast that's taking place on June 14th at the Metro Toronto Convention Center. Very excited to see you guys in person, and looking forward to it. For more information about the event and for registration, please go to www.braskenchamber.org/PDAC 2022. We look forward to seeing you there. Greg, Joaquim, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here with me today.